What's up everyone, I'm Gooshy, and in this video we're going to be going over the only blunt weapon build that you'll ever need. With this build you'll be able to tank as much damage as possible on very hard difficulty, as well as dishing out a ton of damage to quickly move around the map and take out enemies in one shot. So with that, let's get started. The first thing we'll go over is the weapon that we'll be using. As shown in the thumbnail of this video, as cool as the Gorilla arms are, it is not the best option for this build, and there are two main reasons. The first and the main reason is the amount of damage that it outputs. As you see here, I have the legendary Gorilla arms equipped, and the max damage it has is 312 with an attack speed of 2.66. Now we'll compare that to the Cottonmouth, which is the weapon I'll be using. This is just the epic version, and it does 608 damage with 4 attacks per second. So basically you have a DPS difference of 2000 versus 800. Also keep in mind that this is only the epic version. If I upgrade it and craft a legendary version, the DPS jumps up to 2500. And keep in mind with crafting, because the rolls you get are random, you can always save and re-roll the stats for more crit chance, more poison chance, more shock chance, as well as the damage stats that come with it, like electrical damage, chemical damage, which will even further increase the DPS. So purely DPS wise, the Gorilla arms aren't the ideal choice. The second reason why you shouldn't be using the Gorilla arms is kind of a hidden stat, which basically affects your DPS, and this is the range. If you guys have even remotely tried melee combat, specifically using your fists, you know that you have to get super close to the enemy to land those hits. I'd say half of the time, if you are moving and attacking at the same time, you end up punching the air, which results in a decrease in DPS, as well as a loss in stamina. When using an actual blunt weapon, that increase to the range of your attacks is so noticeable. So for your weapon of choice, I highly recommend an iconic blunt weapon. And the reason why it has to be iconic is so that you can craft it all the way up to a legendary rarity to increase the DPS and get increased damage buffs from the crafting skill tree. So the first attribute I maxed out is the technical ability. With the max level crafting, you're going to need Grease Monkey to craft epic items and Edge Runner Artisan to craft legendary items. You can copy the skills that I got here. Most of them are just minor benefits, which reduce the cost of crafting or give you a chance to craft an item for free. But the most important ones that you need are Cutting Edge, which will increase all damage related stats to craft your weapons by 5%, and Field Technician, which will give a 5% increase to damage for all crafted weapons. Next, we want to maximize our melee damage as much as possible. So in the Street Brawler skill tree, I'm using Opportune Strike, which will increase blunt weapon damage against enemies that are stunned by 50%. To activate this buff, we'll also take Dazed, which will have all attacks with blunt weapons have a 30% chance to apply stun. Next, and I think the most important, is Frenzy. Defeating an enemy increases damage with blunt weapons by 100% for 10 seconds. Next, we'll also take Payback, which will increase damage with blunt weapons for 3% for every 1% of missing health. And this is only specifically used for higher health targets, such as mini bosses like these Cyber Psychos. Also, if we go to the Athletic skill tree, we'll also take Steel and Chrome, which will increase melee damage by 20%. Finally, the last skill that we'll take is Flurry, which will increase damage from combo attacks with blunt weapons by 50%. So we'll be taking full advantage of the high attack speed. With more hits that you can land, the higher the chance you'll stun an enemy, to proc Opportune Strike and get that increase of 50% damage to stunned enemies. Alright, so now that we got damage in, the next thing we need is survivability. And to do this, we need heals and a bunch of armor. So in the Street Brawler skill tree, Unshakable will give us 15% health and 15% stamina after successful blunt weapon attacks against stunned enemies. Since we're mostly going to be one-shotting or two-shotting enemies, this doesn't proc that often, but against Cyber Psychos it's a little more useful. Next, we'll also take Rush, which will have us regenerate 5% health over 2 seconds after every successful blunt weapon attack. Next, we'll be also using the Bounce Back MK3, which can be found by a Medpoint vendor right over here. This guy sells the crafting spec for 30 eddies, and so when you use this, it instantly restores 25% health and 6% health per second for 30 seconds. Because healing gives you a percentage of your health back, increasing your max health will essentially give you more health back from healing abilities. So also in the Athletic skill tree, we'll be taking Invincible, which will increase max health by 30%. Next, we want to increase our armor stat to as high as possible, and this is where maxing out our crafting skill tree also comes in handy. and this is because we can repeatedly craft different pieces of clothing so that it has the max amount of mod slots. Both of the upper body slots will have 4 mod slots, and the head and the lower body should have a maximum of 3 mod slots. Next, we'll craft a bunch of armadillo mods, even with the common spec, which if you don't know where the location is, I'll post a bit of where you can find it in the description below. But as you craft the common armadillo mod, you have a chance of crafting higher rarity armadillo mods. So just craft a bunch until you get epic level armadillo mods, which will give you the most armor, and then attach it to all the mod slots that you have. When you highlight over the clothing that you have with all your mods on it, the game shows you an incorrect amount of increased armor, which in this case gave me like 2,000 increase to armor, which is definitely not right, as the total armor I got is only 1,159. And so even though I didn't get the maximum amount of mod slots, I still got up to around 5,000 armor. And so to take this armor even further, next we'll go over the cyberware that we'll be using. And the one thing that's going to give us this is the Berserk operating system. The one I recommend picking up is the Zetatech Berserk MK5, which could be found at the Ripper dock located right over here in Kabuki. And the reason why I think this one is the best is because it gives the most increase to melee damage and armor, both giving it an increase of 20%. It also has another perk where defeating enemies restores 5% of the max health while Berserk is active. It also says that Berserk only lasts 10 seconds for this specific cyberware, but I think this is bugged, and every time you use Berserk it always lasts 30 seconds. You can tell from the timer on the top left as well as the on-screen animation when Berserk is activated and deactivated. We'll also add a mod on Berserk called Beast Mode, which will increase armor resistance and health regen by 15% while Berserk is active. And more importantly, this will give you 100% more melee damage while Berserk is active. Since you can't stack more than one, I also added Devastating Berserk, which will increase crit chance by 50% while Berserk is active. And so after testing this out with the Gorilla Arms, because I figured if I could make this work with lower DPS weapons, it'll easily work for higher DPS weapons, I still found that my survivability was a little bit low. Even with the 5,000 armor and the boost to resistance when playing on very hard difficulty, enemies could still chunk down your HP super fast. I wasn't getting as much health back as I wanted. So another piece of cyberware that I highly recommend is the Heal on Kill. This is located on the north side Ripper dock. You need 18 reflexes and it restores 10% health after defeating an enemy. Also another piece of cyberware that helps a lot is the Second Heart, which is located at the Well Springs Ripper dock. And what this does is instantly restores 100% of your max health when your health falls to 0, which basically gives you a second life. Finally, now that we have lots of armor and health regen, as well as really good DPS, with our crafted iconic melee weapon, there's only one other thing I highly recommend picking up, and I found this out when fighting the Wasteland Cyber Psycho. One of the weaknesses is if you get knocked down by an enemy, it leaves you open to attack for about 5 seconds. So to fix this, I also recommend increasing your body attribute up to 20, so you can pick up the skill The Rock. This will make it so that enemies can't knock you down. So with this, you can basically tank any amount of damage that enemies dish out. Finally, the last thing I wanted to go over are some utility perks, which aren't really required for this build, but takes the build even further. This involves things like speed and increasing stamina. So in this Street Brawler skill tree, we have Relentless, which has successful attacks with blunt weapons against enemies that are affected by stun, restore 20% stamina. Next, Efficient Blows, which will reduce stamina cost of all blunt weapon attacks by 25%. And finally, in the Cold Blooded skill tree, taking the skill Cold Blood will give you increased movement speed by 2% for each stack of Cold Blood after defeating an enemy. And this is super useful for getting from one enemy to the next even faster to take as little damage as possible. This build has a lot of similarities to the Bladed build, which if you haven't checked out, I'll post a card here and put a link in the description below. And with that, that's everything you guys need to know on how to maximize your blunt weapon build. Because I know a lot of you have been trying to use the Gorilla Arms, but it's just not as viable as using an actual weapon. I really hope you guys learned something in this video. If you did, please drop a like, and if you think you'll be using this build or even a part of this build, let me know in the comment section down below on your variation to this build. And if you enjoy more builds like this, hit that subscribe button as I'll be posting a bunch of more builds on Cyberpunk 2077. As always, thank you guys for watching, hope to catch you next one, and GG.